Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. Got another Master Duel video for you, coming at you with a tier list. Now that we have the latest selection pack and Cool Tune, notably, is in the game, wanted to cover 20 of the most popular decks in the game and rank them here on a tier list. Normally, I go out of my way to include a lot of the archetypes that were featured in a new selection pack. However, this time, I decided to just go off of what's currently being played a lot and what's popular. So, I'll throw this out here right now. I've only got 20 decks here, because that's all I've really got time to talk about, but there are many decks not featured here that would definitely fall in the Rogue, or even Tier 3, or sometimes even 2 category. I really just aim to cover what's most popular, and not everything can always make it in, even if it is really competitively viable. Now, referring back to some of those other newer archetypes that I did not include here, RB as well as True Draco and Rose Dragon, I'd probably all put in Rogue, with RB being notably better than True Draco or Rose Dragon. True Draco and Rose Dragon are definitely on the lower end of Rogue, but I think RB has a pretty decent shot of being at least somewhat competitively viable. I would put it like definitely more in upper Rogue, but let's talk about some of the decks that are actually featured here. We're not going to waste any more time. Let's get right on into it, starting with Mitsurugi Yummy. This is a deck that suffered from some ban list hits. However, it's still been performing quite well because although the Cupsy Yummy was limited, Mitsurugi Yummy often did not play the max amount of Yummy monsters anyway, and so they can just include more copies of like Cookie and Lollipo, and they don't really notice the difference too much. I think I'm going to put Mitsurugi in the Tier 1 category for now. I can see an argument for it being like the top of Tier 2, but we'll leave it up here for the time being. Blue Eyes, I've actually been seeing on ladder and has been performing decently well lately. I mean, it's kind of one of those decks that's always pretty solid. It just doesn't always see a ton of play because I think a lot of the reason people are kind of drawn to other decks as opposed to Blue Eyes is that Blue Eyes is kind of like the new Sword Soul, right? It is very solid in what it does, but it kind of just does the same combo line and set up the same board every time. Not that it's bad, but it does get a little bit samey. I think I'll put Blue Eyes in Tier 2. I could see it being in Tier 3, but we'll leave it in Tier 2 for now. Okay, Sky Striker. Very popular and solid control deck, is even seeing a good amount of play in the OCG right now as well, and already has in Master Duel a lot of its most important support. Yeah, I think it's just a really solid deck overall. I'll put it in Tier 2. I think it's pretty comparable to Blue Eyes in terms of power level, maybe like that. Okay, Hero did get a lot of new support recently, but that said, it has not really been seeing a lot of success the same way, you know, some other decks that have gotten recent support have. I'd argue that even Dark Magician's Glow Up has been a lot more noticeable with its latest wave of support than what we've been seeing from Hero. I think Hero is still a really solid Rogue deck, but it's kind of been trapped in Rogue limbo for its entirety of its lifespan on Master Duel, where it's not really, it's getting a bunch of new support, but that's not really elevating it anywhere higher. It's more just like keeping Hero's head above water. Yeah, I've played against Hero a couple of times with the new support, and it's good, don't get me wrong, but I don't think I can give Hero any higher than a Rogue rating. As mentioned, Dark Magician also got some new support, and I don't think it's quite as good as Hero. Really more what I meant when I said that Dark Magician's Glow Up was more notable is that the boost in power that Dark Magician got from its support, I think, is way more noticeable than what Hero got. And looking at some of the overframe cards too, you know, I think that once those comes out, we'll see Dark Magician get even more really solid support that I think might elevate it, you know, even above Hero and possibly into Tier 3. For the time being, I'll leave it in Upper Rogue. It's a really solid deck, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's quite the same power level as some of the other decks you'll see here. Okay, White Forest, I think is going to be our first Tier 3 deck. While it is quite strong, I do think it pales a little bit in comparison to some of these other decks. Although I'm thinking about White Forest compared to Blue Eyes, those feel really comparable. Thinking. Yeah, you know what? Okay, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Blue Eyes down to Tier 3. And I might even put Sky Striker down here too, just because I'm looking at some of the other decks here, and I do notice a couple of things that I think are gonna end up in the tier 2 slot. Mitsuyumi could still get bumps down, but we'll leave it like this for the time being. But yeah, White Forest, I think I could put it in the middle here. Still really solid combo deck. It's just a little bit weaker. A little bit, not much, but a little bit weaker to hand traps than some of the other decks in the meta. There are a lot of decks right now. Like, the difference between tiers definitely lies in both power level and consistency, but a really huge factor for me in recent months has been how well can this deck naturally push through hand traps with its inherent, whoops, sorry, bumped the spacebar there, with its inherent combo line, right? So yeah, I think White Forest being in, like, middle tier 3 for now is fine. Now, Orcust, I'm going to put it in tier 2. You might think it's comparable to some of the other tier 3 decks, but I've been looking at some of the recent in-game stats for Master Duel, and they indicate that Orcust has one of the highest win rates in the game. 54% is comparable to where, like, Dracotail is right now. And higher than, like, a lot of Yummy variants and Vanquish Soul Canine from what I could see. I think Orcust is pretty slept on, and that's by me too. I'm not like trying to sound all superior or anything. If you look on the channel, I've not played Orcust lately. That's because, I don't know. It's really easy to kind of consider it, dead isn't the right word, but just like in terms of power level, just a notable step down from some of the other things we've been seeing. In terms of its end board, I think power mostly. But that said, I think a lot of the reason why it wasn't seeing a ton of play before is that it didn't have great matchups against some of the decks that were coming into the meta, like Dracotail. So I think we're maybe seeing a chance for Orcust to get a little bit of a resurgence here. I've noticed it become more popular as its overall win rate, you know, according, again, to official in-game stats, has become more widely known. So for that reason, I'm going to put Orcust kind of like my sleeper tier 2 pick. If you want to put it in tier 3 with like these other decks, I would not blame you at all for that, but I'm going to leave it here for now. Lunalight's definitely going to be a tier 2 deck, for sure. Liger Dancer just continues to be really, really solid in, I was going to say the current meta, but just about any meta, really. It's really good going first or second, and the Tower's effect is notably difficult to get over. Things I probably don't have to explain to you if you've played against Lunalight for just about any amount of time. So, yeah, solid tier 2 deck. I think I can pretty comfortably put Odeon up here as well. Maybe a little bit lower, actually, because it did suffer a couple of limits from the ban list. To its own archetype only, the field spell, but the solemn cards being limited was definitely an indirect hit towards Odeon's direction as well. Yeah, I think that's a good spot for it there in tier 2. I think Radiant Typhoon I'm also pretty comfortable putting in tier 2. This is kind of what I meant when I said I was looking ahead at some of the other decks to rate, and I was like, you know, I feel like these decks, especially these three up here, are a noticeable step above of some of the other things I was putting in tier 2 before, but yeah, I think that's a good spot for Radiant Typhoon. I think Radiant Typhoon's biggest weakness is that it's a little bit weak playing into boards. It has a little bit of a rougher time going second than some other decks. Pure Yummy is definitely going in tier 2. I think maybe, possibly, it's pretty comparable to Radiant Typhoon, honestly. Now, Pure Yummy is going to more noticeably suffer from the Cup C limit because it was already maxed out on the Yummy names and sometimes even searchers like Puri Map, but I think Pure Yummy is still a really solid deck right now. When you think about it compared to Mitsurugi and Sulfur, you do kind of start to ask the question of like, is there really reason not to play another engine with Yummy? But there is, you know, more hand traps is never a bad thing to have, and also the more generic extenders, like I guess generic for Yummy stuff like, you know, Jester Confi and the Sky Striker engine, like, they mesh a lot better with Yummy. Sometimes you'll just open a hand with, like, you know, Saji and Yummy Surprise, and, like, those are your only cards from your engine that you see, and it's like, oh, well, that's a little bit rough. But with Yummy, you have a lot more opportunity to make plays in certain situations. But I think it's still a little bit weaker than its variants. Now, Magnet Warrior, I feel like has been performing quite well. I'm gonna put it in tier 3, but I think this deck actually does kind of border on tier 2. If you wanted to put it up there, would not fault you at all. Yeah, access to Block Dragon as well as endboard pieces like Barrel and Diffler definitely do make the deck notably stronger here than in some other formats like the TCG, but at the same time, it's not like so much stronger that it's like overrunning the format. I think upper tier 3 is a perfectly fine spot for Magnet Warrior. Ryzeal Mitsurugi. Now, of course, all Mitsurugi variants did have Prayers Gate limited, and the Ryzeal variant is pretty much just a pure Mitsurugi deck, so it's going to notice the Prayers limit a lot more. But I kind of think it's still a tier 1 deck. Your combo line doesn't really change that much. Granted, you don't get as many searches, so you can't use your Prayers right on your turn and then follow up with it later, unless you're able to add it back with like Kusanagi if you already opened Ritual or something. But yeah, I think that while the Prayers limit is pretty noticeable as far as hits to the Mitsurugi engine, it's still very much worth playing, and I would argue this deck is still tier 1. I've played it a little bit since the Prayers limit, and it still feels like so good to play. Alright, Branded Dracotale, another deck which has suffered some consistency limits, but I feel is also still a tier 1 deck. In fact, I think I'm even going to put Ryzeal Mitsurugi a little bit above Mitsurugi Yummy. But yeah, no, Branded Dracotale, I think is definitely the way to go, by the way. Like, it definitely was before over Pure, before the limits, but now that these limits have taken effect, it's really nice to be able to have the extra branded fusions as more starters for the deck. I think it is very much needed. Okay, now here is the big one. Cool Tune. New deck from the selection pack. How does it stack up compared to everything else? Gotta be honest with you, I think it's not only tier 1, I actually think it's just the best deck in the room right now. It didn't suffer any pre-hits, unlike a lot of other decks we've seen recently that were also tier 1 contenders. I guess you could argue that Phydraulius Harmonia not being in the game is a bit of a pre-hit to Cool Tune, but I don't think that slowed the deck down from its position, right? Getting the second wave of support was a huge boost to Cool Tune. I think if it was first wave only, we'd be dropping it somewhere in tier 2. But no, with the deck at full power, it's just, it feels so good to play. Whether you're ending on the negates with I'm already forgetting the level 7 Zaylin. Whether you're ending with that or you're doing extra deck rips as part of your turn 1 combo, your going first win rate is absolutely absurd. And the fact that this deck can play very easily 20 hand traps, like almost no effort required on it from a deck building perspective, I think makes it a very solid contender in a best of 1 format in particular. Like, it's not just that Cool Tune at full power is dominating the OCG, and that's why I think it's also going to be dominant here, although I think that is a pretty good indicator. Again, it's just the fact that the way you can build and play this deck, it plays so well going first or second. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Cool Tune. I think it's a really cool deck, and I think that it is definitely, I will say definitely the best deck right now. I think it's noticeably better than a lot of these other decks. I think mostly because of the recent ban list hitting all these decks in some way, shape, or form. Like, without all these hits, I think we could maybe see a world where, like, Branded Dracotale competes with Cool Tune slightly more. But I think you're going to notice those consistency hits over time, and I think Cool Tune's going to really be able to capitalize on that. Alright, Canine Vanquish Soul. I think it's still quite good. We'll put it in tier 1 for sure. Yeah, because the only thing that got hit here was losing 1 Stake Your Soul, right? Went from 2 to 1, I believe it was. Yeah, that's definitely not that big of a hit, and not one that's going to be an obvious hindrance to the deck moving forward. I think it's still pretty much going to maintain its position as one of the best decks in the meta. Sulfur Yummy is definitely up there as well. That's going in tier 1 between Canine VS and Ryzeal Mitsurugi. Again, you will occasionally notice the Cup C limit, but not even every Sulfur Yummy was on max Yummy monsters. I mean, now you definitely pretty much always play 3 Cookie and Lollipo, I think, but still a very good deck, no changing that. Malice, particularly with Radiant Typhoon, has been making quite a splash lately. I'll put it in, like, tier 2. I think it's a fine enough spot for it. Maybe even a little bit above Odeon. It's less that I think Radiant Typhoon has elevated Malice to new heights, but more that it's just made people aware of the fact that Malice, while a lot less consistent, is still a very powerful deck in its current iteration, but definitely nowhere near as dominant as it used to be. I really like having one of each of the Malice names, except for Marchair, and one Underground, one Goldstark. I know a lot of people have things, you know, they're not really as big of a fan of consistency hits, but remember, it's not just consistency. Red Ransom is banned as well, so it's a lack of consistency and power, and I don't think in the current meta, a Malice in its current iteration, its end board is like that much more threatening than what other decks are doing. I could maybe see this being a little bit over Lunalight, but I wouldn't put it any higher than this in Tier 2. Branded, I'll put it at the top of Tier 3. It's about to get a lot better once Branded gets its new support. Then it goes way, way up, probably back in Tier 1 again. But until then, I think upper Tier 3, arguably lower Tier 2, is a fine enough spot for it. And finally, Gem Knight, particularly with Fiendsmith, recently had an excellent performance in the Duelist Cup. Don't really tend to see it on Ranked Ladder as much, at least I don't, but I think it performed well enough to justify putting it in Tier 2. Again, it's more of a case like we've seen with some other decks here, of it's not that like, oh, all of a sudden now it got a lot better. It's just that it got a lot more popular because people were reminded of how good Fiendsmith Gem Knight is, right? Again, from the Duelist Cup results recently. So that's why we're seeing it a lot more often. I think it's one of those decks that's always been Tier 2, you know, maybe debatably Tier 3, but you just don't see it as often. Like I said, there are a lot of decks not featured here. We only covered 20 of them. That definitely make the cut in Tier 3 or even sometimes Tier 2. And of course, there's a lot more rogue decks out there than just Hero and Dark Magician. But as far as the 20 most popular decks in Master Duel right now ranked, I think this is a pretty solid spot to leave off on. I like this ranking here. Definitely let me know what you think in the comments below as well. But I think for the time being, that's going to go ahead and do it. Thank you as always. Yeah, this is Hexlex. I am signing out. And also hoping that you have a fantastic day. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end of the video, which by the way is one of the best ways to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, take a look at the names on screen. These are folks who have been so generous as to either join as a YouTube member or subscribe over on patreon.com/Hexlex to support. There's also perks for doing so. If you would like to see YouTube videos early, as well as some exclusive videos that get uploaded to YouTube, but for one reason or another I decide not to publish, definitely go ahead and hit that join button to see content early as well as some exclusive content. If you're looking for more exclusive content, over on patreon.com, I upload exclusive videos that are not posted on YouTube just about every single day. Whether you choose to subscribe over on Patreon, join as a YouTube member, or simply continue to watch, your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much. But for now, this is Hexlex. I am signing out, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.